Hi, back here this week with chapter 14. If you've been following along, last week you know that Helena, for the first time, met Attila. Now, that's how we as Americans say Attila, but it could be pronounced Attila. But we're just going to say Attila. Anyway, check out the book online, Amazon.com. You can get it also as a Kindle. Highly recommend it. Got this cool back cover. And you would be supporting me in my efforts. Anyhow, it's quite a long chapter, so we'll see how far we get. But chapter 14, last time where we left Helena, she felt like trapped by Attila's merciless gaze. Chapter 14. Helena and Valimir rode into camp side by side. The rows of tents were vivid and sharp against a deep orange sky. They were arrayed with a rough sense of order. There were too many to count. As they passed the staring people, she shuddered. The moment became her breath, the rocking motion of Pasiel's canter, and most of all the fear palpitating within her heart. A tall, blonde woman ran to Valimir speaking Gothic, but too quickly for Helena to understand. Pointed at Helena, she shouted, her face raw with disappointment. Laughing, Valimir pushed her away from his horse with his boot. She screamed after him, "Valimir!" Looking straight ahead, he ignored her. Helena's stomach tightened. Again, she felt isolated and alone, wondering how she had come to trust this man, this stranger. "Helena," he said. Beside them, Ludimir half-halted his horse and watched with curious eyes. Valimir turned to his brother. "This doesn't concern you." He chuckled. "You're just embarrassed by Maud's little tantrum. What are you going to tell Helena? I'd love to hear." "Enough, Bevian. Go bother someone else." As if to dismiss him, Valimir turned away. "Helena, look at me." She kept her eyes on Pasiel's mane. Valimir reached over and brushed back her hair. "The woman was nothing to me, just a convenience." She looked up and met his eyes. "What is any woman to a man?" Still there, Thudimir laughed. "Be quiet, Thudimir," she said with unexpected vehemence. With a smile, he cocked his elbow, a fist on his waist. "Who am I? Someone for you both to abuse? I think not. I am going." As he cantered his voice away, Helena's voice was terse. "What I said is true. My wife is not a convenience. I'm an asset to protect, not your wife." His eyes narrowed. "You're wrong, Helena. I already told you the reward means nothing to me." They stared, neither flinching from the other. Yet, despite her intentions, her heart opened to him. Her anger dissipated like water into sand. "Valimir, it's hard to stay angry with you." Involuntarily, she sighed with resignation. He smiled. "May the gods continue to bless me." In silence, he led her to the outer edge of the camp. Thudimir was already busy tending his horse. A small creek ran brightly nearby. Helena dismounted and let Pasiel drop his muzzle to drink. He did not drink his fill, but took long sips. When he raised his head, water dripped from his wet mouth, and he turned his attention to some grass beside the stream. Thudimir watched her with a critical expression, trying to find fault with her handling of the horse. With quick expertise, the two brothers tended their horses. After rubbing them down with water, they let them go. The animals did not wander, but immediately lowered their heads to grass. Lena tried to unfasten Pasiel's girth, but could not manage with her injured hand. Feeling a presence behind her, she whirled around with alarm. It was Valimir. Rest, Helena. You've done enough." Though needing his help, her pride wanted to brush aside his offer. Instead, her nod of agreement was reluctant, an admission of weakness. She watched him take off Pasiel's saddle and bridle. He was not rough with the stallion, but methodical and calm. Obscurely relieved, she went to the stream to wash the dust from her face and hands, but took care to avoid Thudimir. The water was frigid. As she shivered, Thudimir loomed over her. Frightened by his sudden appearance, she stood up quickly and was instantly defensive. He stepped close to her, his body almost touching. She turned away abruptly, her steps quick and angry as she walked to Volodymyr. Theodomir grabbed her arm. She winced with pain, pulling away. "Let go of me!" "Why won't you talk to me?" He held on, unaware that he pressed a bruise, a last reminder of Ivan. "I have nothing to say." Instantly, Volodymyr was between them. "What are you doing? Leave her alone." Theodomir released her, muttering to himself. "What's wrong, Vevian? You look so strange," his brother asked. "She won't talk to me." She surprised herself with a gentle tone. "What do you want to say, Vevian?" He gave her a look of devotion, but it vanished as quickly as it had come. "Anything." She thought about her resemblance to their mother. In some ways, the proud, tall man was like a child, longing for what he had lost so young. "And much your mother, Theodomir. She's been dead for many years." His face flushed. "How?" He started. Hesitantly, she touched his arm. "I think she would have been happy to see you so well grown." He blinked his eyes quickly, denying tears, and stalked towards his horse. Putting on his bridle, he spoke with his back to them. "I'm going to find the others." They watched him riding bareback, not glancing behind. Volodymyr was quiet and pensive. In a small voice, Lena asked, "Did I say the wrong thing?" "No, not at all. You spoke from your heart." He paused and added, "Vevian never cried for her. You just forgot." She hesitated, not wanting to be offensive, but had to speak her mind. "I can pity him, but I cannot trust him, even if he is your brother." Volodymyr frowned, but his eyes betrayed pain. He was not always this way. As a child before our mother died, he was happy and full of laughter. Afterward, he changed, becoming difficult, moody, and quick to anger. Maybe her death touched him differently than it did me. "It made you kind." "Sometimes, but not always." A chill went up her spine, but she dismissed it, blaming the cold water still damp on her cheeks. Soon they saw Karachapan and his wagon approaching. Helena smiled and waved her hand, checking herself from running to meet him. Valomir's chuckle was rich with irony. "He's bewitched you too." "What do you mean?" "He says things that no servant would dare say, and I accept it. With a few words he can make Vevian listen, a rare talent." Karachapan, out of hearing range, waved back. "I'm glad he's with you," Helena said. He put his arm around her waist and smiled. After he had erected his tent, Helena lingered with him inside. In wordless companionship, they warmed themselves by a blazing fire. The aroma of Karachapan's cooking was delectable in the air. When a voice called from outside, Helena jumped. "Prince Volodymyr!" Volodymyr cursed. "The gods conspire." Helena whispered in Greek, "What's wrong?" "Attila summons." Her voice was small. "So soon?" "You don't have to go," he said. His word expression belied his words. Attila had specifically asked for her presence. She looked into the fire and spoke slowly. "Sometimes it's better to face things. Attila is always the exception." "What do you mean?" "It's impossible to say what he'll do. It would be best to keep you out of his way." She shook her head. "Hiding would be a sign of weakness." "I'll go. I won't allow him to see that I'm afraid." She paused. "You would be disobeying his command." He shrugged. "Maybe so." "I honor your courage, Helena. But wait, I have something for you." Sitting up, he reached behind him and pulled out her dagger, along with a new belt to hold the weapon at her side. She unsheathed it and saw that it was unblemished and its edge was razor sharp. "Karachapan's an artist," she said with awe. "I can't believe it's the same blade. I want you to wear it for all to see. As my wife, you have the right." You do not need to add that as a slave or a prisoner, she would not have that privilege. Her voice was grave. "Thank you." She wrapped the belt around her waist, but had difficulty fastening it with one hand. Volodymyr was quick to help, though his touch made her legs feel weak. She flushed. "Prince Volodymyr," the man repeated from outside. "He waits." "In a moment, Ishiite. I won't be rushed." "Please. He's bellowing for you, and he'll blame me for making him wait." "I'll be there." There was a pause. "Volodymyr," the man continued. "He asked that you bring the girl." Volodymyr's face became still as stone. Then he sprang to the tent's opening and threw open the flap. In those words, Ishiite? He said the girl, not my wife? It must have been a slip of the tongue. My cousin meant no disrespect. Velimir dropped the flap and turned back to Lena. He stood beside her and put his hands on her waist. He looked down at her with his bright blue eyes. You may change your mind about seeing Attila. I will defend your right. Lena was frightened, yet inexorably drawn to the sparkle of menace in his face. I want to be with you. He kissed her on the lips, pulling her body close to his. Reluctantly, he disengaged from the embrace and took her hand, leading her into the night. Ishiite waited on his horse. Despite the long day, he was untouched by fatigue, just impatience. Finally, perhaps the gods watched over me all, Ishiite said, staring at the couple with open interest. We must hurry. Velimir glowered at him. When he whistled for his horse, Kratchman led him from behind the tent, ready with saddle and bridle. Chewing the inside of his cheek, Kratchman fussed with Hassan's bridle. In his peasant Persian, he said to Helena, Be careful. Keep your thoughts to yourself. Lena thought of her grandfather. From within she heard a clear voice. Trust, Lena. Let the light guide you. Her heart expanded and filled with her with quiet bliss. Her mind questioned the experience, but she discarded her skepticism. The sense of oneness was too sweet. Seeing Kratchman's angular face pinched by worry, she smiled, wanting to share her euphoric sense of peace. His eyes blinked quickly, and his chin moved awkwardly beneath his white beard, but his fear remained. Velimir lifted Helena to the horse and mounted lightly behind. With Ishiite leading the way, they rode through the maze of tents, illuminated by many campfires, into the heart of the Hunnic encampment. Attila's headquarters stood within its center. Far larger than the others, his tent was surrounded by a circular expanse filled with guards and slaves. A man with red hair, wearing rags, ran to take Velimir's horse. As he rushed to them, his one leg moved stiffly. At Kratchman, he had been crippled by Huns to prevent escape. Her stomach twisted as she remembered to be afraid. Velimir tossed his reins to the slave and lifted her down. Be careful with my horse. He bites. The slave nodded, holding Hassan with quiet expertise. Before turning away, Velimir watched with a critical eye. Helena's heart beat with desperation. Her throat was dry. She tried to reclaim her moment of peace, but it had vanished. Velimir squeezed her uninjured hand. As she walked beside him to Attila's tent, her answering smile was forced. At the entrance, a guard scrutinized them with implacable eyes. His face was crisscrossed with intricate scars, his skull deformed by a narrow leather band. When Velimir nodded to him, he emitted a short greeting in Hunnic. The sound was guttural and harsh to Lena's ears. He led them inside and announced, Prince Velimir. Attila was alone. As he turned to face them, Helena wanted to run away. His eyes were cold and unreadable. Dinner had been prepared, waiting uneaten on leather plates. Outside, he ordered the guard. Like Velimir's, the tent was Spartan and utilitarian. An assortment of weapons was stacked neatly in two corners, a sleeping pad placed by the side of the fire. Attila had sat on a plain wooden chair. Yet, the way he filled it reminded Helena of a king on a throne. His legs were slightly open, and he leaned his weight to the left, resting on the wooden armrest. Several fine oriental rugs were laid flat in the ground. On one, well away from the fire, were a number of maps and ruled parchments. You're late. The dinner's cold, Attila said. But come, break bread with me. Velimir lowered himself to one of the oriental rugs. He sat across from Attila, but kept Helena on his right. To see her directly, Attila would have to turn his head. We came as soon as Ishiite called, Lord Attila. We're alone. No need to be formal, Velimir. As you wish, Attila. The Hun's voice was pleasant. Go on, eat. Tell me about your spoils. Their food had been prepared with care, basted with a fine sauce. Attila's meal, however, was simple, plain meat in a leather bowl, hardly cooked. As Velimir chewed, he answered, We found you wealth, Attila. We were fortunate. Attila's glance shifted to Helena, making it difficult for her to swallow. I can see that. Please tell me her name again. Velimir's eyes glittered. My wife's name is Helena. Why so tense, Valimir? Outside of battle, you are never so irritated. She is tired and recovering from injuries, and your orders to Ishite were to bring the girl. You're offended. Attila shrugged, a corner of his mouth turned down. I meant no insult to your honor. Valimir breathed out deeply. Then all is well, Attila. We understand each other. Perhaps, but at least answer my curiosity, Valimir. After all, I upheld your claim against my stubborn cousin. Grelia, Lena thought, wishing him dead. Valimir laughed. What do you want to know? Your inquisitiveness could empty a well of knowledge. Attila smiled, transforming his face from grotesque to magnetic. Helena found herself relaxing. Suddenly it was an effort to remember Kretchpan's warning. Where did you meet Helena? 2 days' journey from here. In a small village, the same place where we found the fortune in jewels and gold. Clearly she's not from the steppes. She was born in Constantinople. Constantinople? By the gods, a civilized woman. This explains why you kept her. Does she speak Greek? Better than I. May I ask her some questions? It would give me pleasure to hear Greek well spoken. Valimir studied Attila. His blue eyes became remote. As you wish. Attila switched from Gothic to Greek. To Lena's surprise, his accent was close to perfect. The intonation was well modulated. May I call her by her first name, or would you prefer, for the sake of your honor, Attila, Helena, wife of Prince Valimir, son of Valdarius, grandson of King Vincerius? Valimir laughed. Call her Helena. I trust your memory. You know whose wife she is. For an instant, Attila scowled. Then his frown vanished. Well, we understand each other. But should you decide to set her aside, please keep my interests in mind. Lena felt as if she were choking. Each breath was a struggle. I'll not repudiate her, Attila. That's not the Ostrogothic way. Don't speak of it again, old friend. Attila's eyes narrowed. Have you told her of our custom? A wife may leave a husband to take another under certain circumstances? There hasn't been time. Then by all means, Valimir, do so now. Valimir turned to Helena, still holding her hand. Helena, under Hunnic law, a man may repudiate his wife for any reason, but the woman has her rights. She may choose another man's tent if her husband fails to provide food and shelter, beats her too much, making her life miserable, or because of an injury he is not able to give her children. He said in a quiet voice, allaying her fears. What say you to that, Helena? Attila asked. I'm happy with my husband. Attila was a study in silence. And he finally spoke. His eyes were grave but veiled. Your wife does you honor, Valimir. We will not speak of this again. Relief swept Valimir's face. Helena's trust was not won so quickly. Attila seemed a man used to his own way. He turned to her and continued in Greek. So, Helena, how did you find yourself in these parts? We're many months from Constantinople. Helena felt each movement of her body, the tightness of her skin on her knuckles, the flush in her face. Her heart whispered its terror. As she acknowledged it, the fear calmed sufficiently for her to speak. My grandfather and I were traveling to Persia to find his son, my father. We had word of his post as a commander in the Imperial Guard. His tone was ironic. On the way to Persia alone? These are perilous times. She flashed him a look of hate, not enjoying his pun. We had bodyguards. Your wife has spirit, Valimir. Bodyguards. Interesting. Such luxuries cost much in gold. I didn't know the arrangements. I was 13. How old are you now? 17, 18? 18. His eyes bored into hers, ruthless with cunning. She was tired of running from him. And you, Lord Attila, what is your age? Much older. I'm 26, the same age as Valimir. You don't look it. You took me for a younger man? Older, actually. He laughed, enjoying the banter. Enough of me. That's for 5 years you've been away from Constantinople. It's a long time for a girl to be away from the great city. At his words, her heart ached. How dare he remind her of home? It has been hard. Where's your grandfather now? Dead. Recently? Behind his words, he mocked her. She hated him and his games. His presence on the steps had cost dearly in lives. He died 5 years ago. That's good. Your grief for him has passed. She felt her darkness driving her to recklessness. You know nothing. Your cousin Grelia murdered my son before my eyes. He was only 3. My mourning has only begun. Helena, you must not be disrespectful to my lord, Valimir interjected with a shout. But Attila only smiled with delight. She may speak her mind, so long as she uses Greek. Her diction becomes eloquent when she's angry. I enjoy a woman with spirit, at least to a point. Helena seethed. He hated to be spoken of as if she were not present, only an object. Belatedly remembering Kratapan's warning, she kept quiet. Attila had not finished with her. His questions became patient, taking her step by step through the death of her grandfather, her marriage to Kanzbar, relatives in Persia, and her father's service to the Persian Empire. Each query led smoothly into the other, even unraveling Kanzbar's relationship with his son. Whenever Valimir tried to interrupt, Attila ignored him. The interrogation exhausted her, allowing her scant space to hide. Almost as if he had saved it for last, Attila asked, "And what was your grandfather's name?" "Belusisram of Ishtar." Attila nodded. His only reaction. "I know of this man." She felt a rush of air beating at her ears and was upset that he had heard of her grandfather. In her heart, he did not want any confirmation that he had any sort of fame. Had he heard of him as a rich and kindly Persian, or as a shaman in his own right, whose darkness had culminated in cursing Kanzbar and all his seed? For her sanity, she wanted to remember her grandfather as compassionate and gentle. Her voice became rough, almost hoarse. "What have you heard?" He smiled, pleased to have captured her attention. He followed the prophet Zarathustra. But before that there were stories. Interesting stories involving magic. His words resonated inside her, echoing what she already knew. "My grandfather was a good man." "No doubt. Also a rich one. There's a large reward offered for Belusisram's granddaughter. Valimir, have you heard of it? The amount is most satisfying." "I've enough wealth, Attila, but should she want to go home, I'll take her." "Last I heard, Goths weren't overly welcome in Constantinople. Please remember to say farewell if you go. I'll miss you." "I'd miss you." With unexpected passion, she realized that she did not want Valimir captured or mistreated because of her promise to her. Her words came slowly, her voice subdued. "Nothing waits for me in Constantinople. My grandfather made our house a home, but he's gone. My father, I don't know where he is. Our last news of him was from Persia, but he's a stranger. I'd like to send word to our steward. He'd be glad of news of me." Attila shrugged. "I lost my scribe and only have a small talent for writing. As we move west, we'll find one for your letter." "Have you a way to send a message?" "Every so often I communicate with my Uncle Ruglip." "Oh," she said, biting her lip with disappointment. "We'll find a scribe eventually. I need one." The thought of waiting a day longer distressed her. For 5 years she had longed to send a message home. Now the opportunity teased her, beckoning just out of reach. "I could write it," she said, even as she wondered how she would be able to make her letter legible with her left hand. "You can? Most unusual. Why? It only takes time and practice. Of all the women that I've known, only a few had the knowledge, and they were Romans, noble born." He paused, his mind turned Edward. "Who taught you?" "My grandfather. He was a wise man," Attila said. Valimir interrupted. "Attila, Helena has asked for 2 things. First, her mother's wedding ring." He raised his hand and slid off the plain gold band, putting it down before Attila on the green and golden rug. It sparkled all alone against the rich texture. Also, she'd like her grandfather's sword. Attila picked up the ring, examining it with a professional eye. "Where's the sword?" "Ludimir holds it for you. It's good quality. The sheath is decorated with some semi-precious stones. As my share, I'd be satisfied with the ring and the sword, along with the 2 horses in my possession." Attila shook his head. "You asked for too little, Valimir." The Hun looked at Helena, his eyes bright with intelligence. "Helena, as my gift to you, I give you this ring, your grandfather's sword, the horses, and one other thing that captures your fancy." Helena tensed. As much as she wanted what he offered, she refused to be in his debt. Sensing plans within plans, she rejected the opening gambit. "It would not be proper to receive valuable gifts from a man other than my husband. I'm very sorry, but I must decline your generosity." Attila frowned and his eyes narrowed. Helena held her breath. Then he began to chuckle. "You found a woman of honor, Valimir. Do you know how well the gods have favored you?" Valimir was succinct. "Yes. Helena, I'll give Valimir this ring, he said, placing it back on the rug, and the sword. He may do with them as he wishes. Her smile was spontaneous. Oh, thank you. Your thanks are my payment, Helena. It pleases me to see you happy. Embarrassed, she studied the rug. Valimir's hands were clenched. His knuckles were white. Is there anything else of your grandfather's you'd like? She looked at the Hun, looking past the mutilated cheeks, the broad nose, the corners of the mouth that hinted at cruelty. His eyes were lively and magnetic, far more than cunning. She sensed his brilliance, and it frightened her. There's a small rug, mostly blue with dark red. It's not new, but a fine craftsmanship. My grandfather used it in his prayers. I don't know if it's valuable. Nothing else? You don't ask for a pretty bracelet or a necklace to set off the green in your eyes? A beautiful woman should be adorned with jewelry. The veins of Valimir's neck stood out at these words. Her reaction was immediate. She held up the Thracian ring that Valimir had given her. After this, what else could I want? He studied it and glanced at Valimir. Isn't that your mother's ring? Attila asked quietly. You remember. Your wife wears it well. Valimir picked up the plain band still on the rug. Thank you, Attila. Without ceremony, he put it on her hand. She clutched it and brought it to her heart. Hindered by her bandaged hand, she tried to put it on, but was unsuccessful. What's wrong with her hand? Attila asked. Grelia broke it. Attila frowned. His way with women is unfortunate. As an apology for my cousin, please allow me to give her a plain gold necklace. That ring will only fit her fourth finger, already so occupied by your mother's ring. For the other hand, it needs time to heal. What say you? What do you say, Helena? Valimir asked. With my husband's permission, I accept your gift. Not as an apology. I can never forgive Grelia. Helena, you've insulted our host. You speak of his blood kin. Valimir said with distinct resemblance. I don't care. I want no offering in Grelia's name, she said in a flat voice. I apologize for my wife's behavior. She does not understand our customs. No need, Valimir. Vengeance is something we Huns understand. He trembled inwardly, sickened by the comparison. You are generous, Attila. I'll not forget. Valimir said. Think nothing of it. He snapped his fingers. In a moment, the guard entered with his head bowed. Attila spoke quickly in Hunnic, and the man was gone. Helena wondered if he had given orders for her death. She glanced at Valimir's face and was reassured by his lack of concern. Are we to break camp tomorrow? Valimir asked. No, we'll have a ceremony, a celebration. Then we'll see if it's time to head back home. The men will enjoy the feast. The guard returned, bending his knee, offering Attila the slender gold necklace, his eyes outstretched with his palms up. Attila nodded, dismissing him. Valimir, I give this to you. Do this as you wish with it. I'll see to the sword and the rug. My thanks, Attila. Casually, Valimir took Helena's ring from her hand and threaded the necklace through it. Attila watched, his stare avid as the Goth fastened the gold chain around her neck. From time to time, Valimir, I may need to borrow your wife's services as my scribe. Valimir's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. If Lena could be of help, it would be my honor. With a broken hand, I can't see how she could write. Well, in Rome, I learned many things. Sometimes I have questions about spelling and grammar. Perhaps her training was more thorough than mine. I hated my tutor and didn't always listen. Surely King Roglava would never notice if a word was misspelled here or there. Valimir countered. Of course not. But his scribe would certainly point out any error. He knows how Roglava loves to find fault with me. Attila licked his lips, distant look in his eye, and added enigmatically, at least for now. As you wish. Though I trust you completely, Attila, I'd want to be with her. Your reputation with women is long-standing and well-deserved. Attila's smile was not pleasant. Of course, Valimir. We wouldn't want her to fall prey to my charm. Valimir only shrugged. I'm not worried. Besides, Ludimir, who else could I trust so well? Attila inclined his head with dismissal. With your leave, we must go. I thank you for the excellent meal, Valimir said, standing. Come again and soon. Turning to leave, Valimir took Helena's hand. From his chair, Attila murmured, Valimir, had you heard about the ransom before we left? Helena's heart stopped. Valimir faced him. Yes. You are deep, my friend. Now I understand your strange strategies of attack. All this time you've been looking for her, haven't you? Yes. How can you collect the ward if she's your wife, or perhaps your wedding is just an empty ruse? You study her for a moment, although she is extraordinarily beautiful. Don't insult me, Helena. Attila, I did not take this woman as my wife for a ransom. Can you accept that? Our laws are binding on us. Your wedding is valid, but I had not expected you to be so cunning. Valdemar laughed. Have you forgotten so much? Didn't I help you when we were young to make your brother Bleda look foolish? Attila glanced at the fire. Perhaps we were too successful. In the end, Ruglova kept his favorite nephew home and sent me, the dangerous one, to Rome. Never wished to see me again, that much I know. You are my lord and leader. Attila, if by chance I receive the award, it is of course yours. You'd not live to collect it, old friend. Keep away from big Christian cities. I need your crafty mind a while longer. Vladimir laughed. I have no intention of letting Romans hang me on a cross. Attila's eyes bored into Helena. She's worth more than the asking price. I wouldn't give her up. Good night, Attila. Your wives wait impatiently. As they went outside, Helena heard him say to himself, perhaps. The red-haired slave untethered Hassan and handed Vladimir the reins. Placing Helena on the roan stallion, Vladimir acknowledged the Gaul. You've done well. The man bobbed his head with respect. Once mounted, Vladimir tossed him a copper coin. The slave reached and caught it with the agility of an athlete, but his crippled leg marred his innate grace. Helena pitied him. In silence they returned to Vladimir's tent. Vladimir's tent was pitched nearby. In the cold night air, Helena clearly heard the sounds of passionate lovemaking. Eagerly a woman called, Bevian, Bevian. Helena was reminded of Magda, who routinely pretended to orgasm. Embarrassed, she studied the stars. His face strained with worry, Kratapan emerged from his compact quarters. His expression cleared when he saw them. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if in a prayer of thanks. He moved to hold Hassan's reins. You're back. Vladimir burst out. No thanks to Helena. Not only did she tell Attila that his cousin was a murdering brute, but she wouldn't accept Attila's apology on Grilia's behalf for breaking her hand. Was Attila surprised to discover that Grilia had grievous character flaws? Vladimir shouted, It's not amusing. He modulated his voice, speaking lower. I've seen what happens to those who speak to him with less disrespect. What happened? Was he furious with her? Vladimir was grim. No, he was